police officers happen to have testified that that's a common statement in the course of treatment or in the course of training of Minneapolis police officers, you might take exception with that statement.
I didn't follow your question. It's very hard to hear through that plexiglass.
And I'm losing my voice, I think. Excuse me. If a Minneapolis police officer,
Yeah.
try to talk closer to the mic, the Minneapolis police lieutenant who trains Minneapolis police officers testified that it is frequently said and trained to police officers that a person can talk, it means they can breathe. You would have a problem with that.
Yes, I mean, they're able to breathe at that moment in time, but 10 seconds later, they may be dead.
Right. And because dealing with any person is a rapidly evolving situation that can change from second to second.
Yes.
Now, in terms of the calculations that you've made, you would agree that your calculations are generally theoretical, correct?
No, they're not theoretical. I mean, they're based on direct measurements. They're based on extensive research.
But you're making certain assumptions in the application of that science, are you not?
Very few assumptions.
You're assuming the weight of Mr. Chauvin.
Right, I'm aware. So, I mean, obviously, I'm aware that there's two different weights that are given.
And you're assuming the weight of the equipment that the officer wears.
Yes.
And you've not actually ever physically measured the weight of the equipment a police officer carries, correct?
No, I mean, I took the measurements that are reported.
And you're not actually weighing what Mr. Chauvin weighed on May 25th of 2020.
No.
And in your measurements, you appear to be, at least from my understanding, which is going to be limited, but from my understanding, is that your measurements assumed an equal weight distribution between the right and the left legs.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And so again, as we know, as things change and evolve and flow, weight is pretty frequently redistributed, right?
That is correct.
And again, in terms of the EELV, am I saying that right? The EELV, that's the
End expiratory lung volume.
All right. You're also basing that those calculations on the presumption that a person is a healthy individual, right?
For the ELV, it's not going to change, really.
But in terms of the normal respiratory rates, some of the other factors that you put into your analysis, it's all premised upon a healthy individual, right?
Right. It's based on a 46-year-old person of a particular height and sex, yes.
Right. Who's healthy.
Correct.
Right. And so you would agree if biology can change rapidly, that the the specific biological conditions of Mr. Chauvin and or Mr. Floyd come into play, right?
Correct.
And those volumes or those figures that you've assessed in connection with this case, they are conditioned upon him being a healthy individual.
Right. I mean, it varies in terms of the lungs. I mean, say, for example, compliance will vary, but end expiratory lung volume is pretty robust. It just isn't going to vary.
Okay, so but other factors, like you said, what was the first thing?
Lung compliance will vary from one person to the next person, but it varies different segments within the lung. They're not all monolithic.
Okay. Now, and you talked about one thing in terms of, and this is a little bit of an aside, in terms of the prone position and the pushing of the stomach into the lungs, right?
Yes.
The size of a person's stomach has some bearing on that, right?
It does.
A person like myself who has a few extra inches, if I'm prone, it's going to perhaps push further or harder up into my lungs, right?
Yes.
A person who is healthy physical, muscular, it's going to have less of an impact.
That is correct.
All right. But again, in terms of what we have learned about Mr. Floyd from his autopsy and his medical records, is that we understand that Mr. Floyd had some heart disease, right?
That is correct.
In fact, I believe that he had in some of his arteries somewhere between a 75 and 90% occlusion of his ventricular arteries, right?
Correct.
And that's going to affect blood flow in a person, right? It's going to make the body work a little harder to get the blood through the body.
No, not really. It's not going to do that.
Okay. How does that affect a person's respiratory?
The coronary artery. If the coronary artery is affecting it, and if the coronary artery was contributing to shortness of breath, you would expect that he would be complaining of chest pain, and you would expect that he would be demonstrating a very rapid respiratory rate. We don't see either.
Okay. And we'll come back to the respiration. I can't say it right. I'm taken by your accent. The respiratory rate.
I can't compensate for it.
Appreciate it.